Welcome to KZSC News, local news from the Monterey Bay. On today's show, the impact of a new offshore oil drilling proposed off of California by the Trump administration, a breakdown of Measure Z, and the wishes of Santa Cruz County Board Supervisor John Leopold. In response to the Trump administration's proposal that would allow an expansion of oil and gas drilling in the U.S., KZSC's Daniel Martinez contacted the Santa Barbara Environmental Defense Center.
I'm Kristen Hislop, and I'm the Marine Conservation Program Director at the Environmental Defense Center in Santa Barbara.
What are your thoughts on the draft proposal for off-continental shore drilling?
Yeah, so this 5-year Outer Continental Shelf draft proposed program, as it's referred to, comes after we pretty recently received our current draft proposed program that is supposed to last for quite a few more years. So we're only in the first year of that. So we are disappointed that the process is being reinstated and starting all over again, and we have to go through the public process of this again, and especially disappointed that almost all U.S. waters are included for potential leasing. More than 90% of all U.S. waters are included, which shows that there wasn't a lot of thought as to the most appropriate place to consider offshore oil and gas, whereas the current plan that we have does consider the ecological significance and economic significance and all the other reasons that you might not want to have offshore oil drilling in certain areas.
So if drilling is enabled, how will this affect local marine wildlife and the environment in the various areas that it will be allowed into?
Well, if I can speak specifically to California, and being from a Santa Barbara-based organization, we know exactly how this can impact our shoreline. We saw this in 1969 with the large oil spill off the Santa Barbara coast that had devastating impacts to the marine environment and to our local communities. And then again, we just had an oil spill in 2015, so here we are many years later experiencing the same kind of devastation that is possible due to an oil spill. So that's really the biggest risk, is there isn't a perfectly safe way to drill offshore, and we see really devastating impacts anytime there's a spill. So that's the risk.
Along those same lines, how likely is another large-scale spill or explosion?
I would say very likely. We have spills often, and we just had one in 2015, and that wasn't even from an offshore rig. That was from oil that had been transported onshore from the rig. So we see it in all different places. There's oil spills in the Gulf quite often, and we always say it's not a matter of if, but when there will be an oil spill.
Corporations have stated that new technology would be making these operations much safer than they have been in the past. Can you comment on the validity of those statements?
Well, I would say that new technologies, while great, have to be matched with regulations, and the federal government at the same time they're considering opening much more of our nation's waters to offshore oil and gas, are also rolling back regulations on safety measures that were put in after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill back in 2010. And those regulations were put in because what was currently happening in terms of safety measures wasn't enough, and we saw that firsthand. So I would say that while any efforts to make these activities safer are welcome, it has to be met with equal regulations from the federal government.
Interestingly enough, this proposal has actually received an interesting mix of bipartisan opposition from state governors. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. So this plan is pretty unpopular. I haven't heard a whole lot of support for it, except for some of the oil industry themselves. And just today we heard that Florida was going to be taken out of consideration because the governor had opposed it, being a Republican governor. And, of course, all of the other governors of the other coastal states that are actively opposing this new draft proposed plan are saying, well, we want to be part of that exemption too. We're talking about how important our coastal and marine resources are, and we want to be taken out of consideration for any new offshore oil drilling as well. So not only is there bipartisan opposition for this plan, but there is strong action from our governors and other representatives that are trying actively to not just oppose, but find ways that they can prevent this type of plan from coming to their state.
So the process for the new draft proposed program is in its very early stages, and as evidenced by Trump's recent decision to exclude Florida, do you think there is potential for, from now until its implementation, for it to change drastically in its area of inclusion?
Well, that is our goal as a nonprofit, and with all of the other partners that we have working on this. Our goal is to get this draft proposed program changed. So we are hoping to exclude California, and I know that the other coastal states on the West Coast are working to get exclusions as well. And that has been consistent with several federal and state actions that have been taken to protect this area. We have national marine sanctuaries and national marine monuments, and we have resolutions from our state governments in opposition of this. So our goal is to absolutely change this before it's final.
And public meetings do start January 16th to hear comments on the proposal. Will you be participating in these public meetings?
Yes, so they're calling them public listening sessions, and the one in California is going to be on February 8th, and I will definitely be there along with many of our other partners. And we're also pushing for the agency to have more public hearings so that they're not just in state capitals. Especially California, our state capital is pretty far inland and away from some of the communities that are going to be the most active in opposing this plan. So we're really trying hard to get more of those hearings locally on the ground and along the coast.
One last question, and it's fairly broad, but do we need this oil and gas here that these drills will be bringing?
Well, one of the things that California has been very good at is setting some pretty aggressive alternative energy goals. So we aren't just saying, hey, don't drill here. We're saying we're going to step up our renewable energy portfolio, and we have aggressive goals, as I mentioned, and we're hitting them. So in terms of the state of California, we don't think we need this offshore oil, and we think we have better ways, cleaner ways to not only meet our energy needs, but prevent any future climate change issues that would be inevitable from more offshore oil drilling.
KZSC News spoke with Protect Monterey County, a group which is still dealing with court battles in and around the Measure Z ballot option from November of 2016.
My name is Andy Shaw-Corona. I'm the head of the legal committee for Protect Monterey County and one of the folks who worked on both the Measure Z campaign in Monterey County and the Measure J campaign in San Benito County.
All right, and can you go ahead and tell me a little bit about what Measure Z is?
Yes, Measure Z was a citizens' initiative. A citizens' initiative is law that's enacted directly by the people after collecting signatures and putting a measure on the ballot. And this particular citizens' initiative did three things. It banned fracking and acidizing by the oil industry. It phased out wastewater injection, which is perhaps the most dangerous part of these oil operations. And it set a limit, said there would be no new oil wells in Monterey County. The initiative passed with 56% of the vote, even though the oil industry outspent us 18-1. So it's big news that regular people can take on the most powerful industry on earth and win. But it's also important news now, one, because the decision, a judge struck down 2/3 of the initiative right before New Year's, Judge Wills, Superior Court of Monterey County. But it's big news because, one, it's not going away. The decision is going to be appealed by Protect Monterey County and hopefully by the County of Monterey as well. So it's going to go up and perhaps as far as the California Supreme Court, probably likely to go to the California Supreme Court. It's big news because it is about the rights of communities to use their authority over land use, over industrial development, to protect themselves and to determine what kind of future they want to have. And it's also big news because the Trump administration is now trying to open up offshore oil drilling off the coast of California, and many of the communities, including Santa Cruz County and Monterey County and many others, almost 30 years ago, decided that they were not going to allow offshore oil drilling, and they used their authority over land use to say that it would be no infrastructure, no development, no building to support offshore oil drilling. So in a lot of ways, this case has impact on all of those. And so we're looking, of course, for all these counties to step in and help, play a role in telling judges that they want this authority defended.
And would you be willing to talk for a little bit about what Chevron and other opponents of the measure have been using in the legal system and what their arguments have been?
Sure. I mean, their argument is that these local measures like Measure Z are preempted by state or federal law. That is, that the state and federal laws don't allow us to make these kinds of decisions. But there's a tremendous amount of case law, 100 years of case law, that says that local authorities do have this right. Before we launched any of the efforts in this region, and by the way, that Santa Cruz County under John Leopold did a ban of all oil and gas development. It was passed by the supervisors. That was, I believe, 2013 or so. So basically, our confidence is that essentially when these things have been tested in court before, as a matter of fact, the offshore oil drilling ban, which when these counties banned structures that support offshore oil drilling, that was challenged in court and it was upheld. There's been numerous cases that have shown that the cities and counties have this kind of authority.
Santa Cruz County Board Supervisor John Leopold outlined his vision of 2018 in his January newsletter to residents. His wishes include fine-tuning marijuana regulations, holding a more firm stance with developers when it comes to building affordable housing, and continuing the discussions on future design of the county's commercial corridors. This point will likely be the most contentious, with longtime residents fearful that building upward will create an urban canyon effect, destroying the sunny beach town aesthetic that drew so many people in the first place. This has been realized in other towns closer to San Francisco, such as Palo Alto and Redwood City, where many residents and officials regret giving in to the enticing but often deceptive concept of residential retail mixed space construction. Proponents of increasing the vertical limitations on building say the strategy will allow preservation of the natural beauty currently present in undeveloped areas while accommodating new residents as the population grows. Santa Cruz City and County are both surrounded by more greenbelts than almost any other part of the state, given the privilege of mountains and ocean bordering almost every edge of the community. Although Supervisor Leopold is putting this on his to-do list for the year, Santa Cruz will likely not make any irreversible decisions on increased building this year, as much of the discussions become ingrained into plans for each 20 years of area planning. All are welcome to make their views heard by emailing or calling the board, or by most effectively speaking at their meetings every other Tuesday on the 5th floor of the Santa Cruz County Governmental Center at 701 Ocean Street. I'm Daniel Wootan.
I'm Ty Goering.
And I'm Jordan Penland with KZSC News, local news from the Monterey Bay.